Harry and I chatted a lot, and I'd watched him on Cheers and Night Court, and I'd seen him do stand-up and magic.
This is one you probably know.
So I was into that guy and excited to get to play him.
Directing kids in general is challenging.
And he takes a powder and jumps, boom, jumps right over you, and suddenly you guys see him go, and that'll be the end of this first piece.
And directing 7, sometimes 10, 12 kids all in one scene is hugely challenging because they have so much energy.
I think Seth was more or less the ringleader.
We got in a lot of trouble.
Let's get out of here!
We're kids, both on set and off.
But I think us getting in trouble together also made us a lot closer.
Yeah.
We also had our little spats. Like, we got tired of each other. Jonathan Brandis and I often took out our stresses by bagging on each other pretty intensely, actually. But at the end of the day, we were all pretty close.
If it were filmed now with that same group of kids, there would be a lot of them who had diagnoses, maybe ADHD, oppositional defiance. Some of them just would not shut up.
We were dropping water balloons off of our balcony onto people's convertibles. I think one time we managed to do it with Kool-Aid, and the person was fairly upset. The police came, told us it wasn't a good idea to do that, especially since we weren't citizens. We thought we were going to get deported.
I honestly did not get a lot of their jokes. All the other boys had read the book, and in the book, the kids all have sex with Bev. The boys knew this, but I didn't know, and so they kept making references to this fact, and they were just going above my head. So finally, my mom said, "Why don't you just read the book?" And so I read it, and I was kind of horrified, but in a way, it was kind of liberating too, because when I was 13, you know, you're going through puberty and things are changing and stuff. So it was just this very sort of odd entry into adolescence for me.
There were scenes that I never thought twice about, meaning the orgy scene with the kids with Bev.
Pennywise and it are the things that drive the losers to, in the novel, have this very, very obscure and weird orgy in the middle of the narratives where they're all having sex with Beverly. It's to ward off it, to keep it at bay, because childhood is what it loves.
I am the eater of worlds and of children.
And if you want to push away from the thing that's scary to you, you push into the thing that it can't feed on, and you do that through sex.
I just thought it was one of Steve's digressions down a lane that didn't work.
I remember the guy who played Officer Nell. He completely lost his shit one day.
There's a scene where we're all in the Barrens building the dam. The policeman comes along and says, "Hey, what are you kids doing down there?" And one of the kids said, "Masturbating." We all started laughing, and then also it carried on. We couldn't get the next, like, 3 or 4 takes.
We weren't focusing. And I remember getting the "this isn't professional" lecture.
There were times that Jim pulled them aside and gave them the lecture. And I sometimes would sort of lose it a little bit on set and say, "Look, you're actors here. I know you're having fun. I love you're having fun. You have to do your job."
Our director came to me and he said, "Jim, I'm losing it with these kids." So I said, "I need a meeting with the kids before we break for lunch, and I don't want their parents there." They rallied around, and I said, "You are making a picture. If you came here because you want to be an actor, then I could tell you right now, whatever you're doing on the set will reflect on whether you work again. I do recommend that you pay attention to your director. Shape up, guys," and walked away.
The adults when they got all the adults together, because some of them knew each other and they were all buddies, they were actually more noisy than the kids.
We used to try to make each other throw up, okay, by being as gross as we possibly could, right? To make the other person gag. We're adults, you know, sort of. It just got louder and louder and louder until the assistant director finally came in and said, "You guys have to leave. You have to go outside on the street. You can't be in here because we can't get any work done."
I want to make sure you remember my name.
God, Henry Bowers.
My agent called and said, guess what, we've got an audition for you. And I said, oh, really, for what? She said, Stephen King's It. She said, it's a big production, it's a miniseries, it's incredible. She said, please, work your ass off for this audition. She said, it's once in a lifetime. I knew hundreds of kids had probably gone in there, big guys, were gonna go in there and be the traditional bully, which I don't find very threatening, to be honest with you. And so I thought, okay, who can I channel? I always refer to Dennis Hopper because he's a very small man, but he conveys an intensity that's menacing.
Jared was an exceptional actor.
You're dead, fat boy.
For someone who was his age, the level of commitment that he had was frightening.
I went in for the audition, and the casting director grabbed me, and he said, I've got to get you to the producers right away. He said, you're exactly what they're looking for. And I said, me? And again, I was a scrawny kid, and I was being plucked out of that group.
He just had something about that guy. He had some sort of menacing appeal about him. Talk, girls. I could be wrong, but I believe I auditioned for it 3 times. And the first one was for Henry Bowers, and I wanted that part very badly.
I want you to think about that before you die.
As we know, Jared Blanker got Henry Bowers, and what character I played on it is actually a little contentious because in the script, I was Patrick, and I noticed that IMDb, and depending where you look online, I played Victor, which always confused me when the fans were like, hey, we loved you playing Victor in Stephen King's It. And I was like, you mean Patrick? And they'd be like, no, Victor. And I'm like, no, it was Patrick.
The very first thing that I did was another iconic film called Never Ending Story, where ironically I played a bully. I managed to get typecast in kind of that bully role, not because I was big, just because I was intense and could beat people up. Let me show you that I could really burp on command without throwing up as well, I might add. Yeah.
In the book, it's obvious that Henry is badly, abuse doesn't begin to cover what he suffers at the hands of his father, and he has this true fear of his father. I'm not a method actor, but I did keep that a bit in mind when I was attempting to torture and ultimately kill these poor children, right? He needed to transfer those feelings of helplessness. He wanted to impose that same fear on other people that he suffered when he went home at night. There's one scene in the film, it's the only scene where my character is vulnerable, and that's in the classroom. And that's when he's being threatened to be kicked out after a disturbance. There's a crack in my voice, and he says, but my father will tan my hide. And that sort of typifies the fear that he has of his father. I actually get emotional about this because my dad's passed. He wasn't supportive at all. He never went to any of my plays. He sort of scoffed at all of my dreams and aspirations. But I remember that he came home from work, and I said, Dad, I got it. And his shock and the pride and the sadness that he hadn't embraced this dream earlier. And from that point on, though, it was nothing but pride, and it was a wonderful thing. I apologize for getting emotional. I wanted to be as sensitive off camera as I possibly could. Yelling these racial slurs and these obscenities, calling him, fat boy and all of that kind of thing. I wanted to make sure after the take that he knew that that's not the way I felt.
Or what, boy? Or what?
He always told me how uncomfortable he was with having to say some of the things he had to say to me, which was great. Because it was some harsh words, man. It was some harsh words said.
I'd always apologize afterwards. And the Americans were quite astounded by that. They thought, well, you're playing a part.
There's a scene where I get confronted by Henry Bowers, where he's supposed to carve the H in my belly.
Hey, look, it's the fat boy. Stop the day, fat boy.
And it was probably the scene that I feared the most. I thought for a moment that he could very well lose it and go ahead and just, start the artwork on my stomach right then and there.
Come on, don't really cut him.
Cut him, huh? Cut him?
He made it very easy to be afraid. But I remember that being probably the most difficult scene for me to film.
The only source of disappointment for me was the fact that we couldn't go as raw and as bold as they did in the book. The violence is something that I wanted to go further with it. I just felt it would have been more effective if we were able to do that, knowing fully well that we weren't able to.
Henry Bowers.
There were 2 adults that were cast later, and
Green Epstein were very sweet about allowing us to look at some people that were friends.
Henry. This is scaring me already.
It needed a special quality person. And in this case, he was being cast after the boy who played Henry Bowers, who was also a very special person and had a strangeness about him.
I tell you, people will always remember Henry Bowers.
Michael Cole, he was from a show called Mod Squad that I grew up on.
He wasn't traditionally a badass, but he just showed that side, and so he was just kind of one of these little gem finds, somebody that had some gravitas.
After all those years, Michael had attained a patina of strangeness, which some of us do. And so when he came in to talk about it, I felt very positive right there and then that he could pull that role off as, okay, that strange little boy grew up to be this strange man.
We'll pay you back. So we'll pay you all back. Not many casting directors will do this. I got down on the floor crawling around, and I was so shook up, and sweat was starting to run down. And Victoria got down on the floor with me, sliding sheets of paper in front of me so I could get the cue. Boy, what a champion.
I met Michael Cole, and he was perfectly polite, but not very effusive or friendly. And I actually backed out of his trailer, and I thought, I'm just going to leave you alone to your business. So he did a great job, obviously.
Pennywise is wonderful. I mean, he's charming and scary and both elusive and enthralling, you know? He's like any good drug. Like, you just want to go to it, but then you regret it immediately.
Pennywise is much more overtly comic.
Won't do any good to run, girly boy.
As a lure for the kids and as a sort of perverse set of jokes for the audience. But when he scares the crap out of you. He found the way to really lure you in like Georgie in the sewer.
Exactly.
When Georgie is first taken by Pennywise, which is a great scene when he follows the boat down the street in the rain.
The effects guys had done this brilliant job to figure out how to get the boat to flow all in one take.
Tommy Lee Wallace opened the sewer grate, which is just a manhole cover, which is about 4 feet away from the sewer, and had Tim crouch down and speak
Hi, Georgie.
into the sewer.
We had a strange day to shoot it. You can almost always count on overcast in Vancouver, but this day was sunny and bright. But we better go ahead and do it because here we are and the set is built.
You could see the rays of sunshine coming through the scaffolding that they built to create the rain.
I had trepidation about that, but the effect was kind of wonderful. The light was doing weird things, and of course you could see the rain really well because it was backlit by the sun. Then you get to the actual sewer. That was a set. It was done outdoors. The set was up high, and Tim was just standing with his face up against the opening. So we were on a riser looking down as if we were on the street.
Little Georgie at the beginning of the film, when he's chasing his paper boat and I grab him, he stopped and said,
Tim, you're scaring me, you're scaring me.
It'll save you a little acting, won't it?
That wonderful little boy and Tim Curry's performance.
They float.
To me, that's what that scene is. Not much in the way of special effects.
You float soul!
One of the scenes that was left out of the final showing of it was that scene where Sharon comes to the door and is presented with a fireman holding the body of her son.
Holding me with my arm in my sleeve and the blood dripping out of the sleeve.
It's pouring rain, and she opens the door, and there he is. And I spent all day screaming as we did take after take.
I guess since it was made for TV, that was pushing the envelope a little bit.
We were certainly aware that we were doing a horror movie for television.
Joey, can you get a little 355?
And back then, we were very limited to what you could show.
We were breaking new grounds because I don't remember before any kind of material like this that I saw on television. Sci-fi, horror, blood, and there was a lot of that. And we had to work with the program practice department at all times. There was a scene where the kids become blood brothers and sisters, and they cut their hand, and they place their palms on palms. We had to change that because it was in the early 90s, and it was during the time of AIDS, so we wrote the scene to spit in their hand.
The advertisers were very nervous. This was a children in jeopardy story, and we had to focus it on the fact that it was a Stephen King novel, that it was very popular.
Executives, creatives knew it, but program practices still had to follow their guidelines, and we were constantly up against them, pushing it and fighting for the creative integrity of the piece.
Broadcast standards rejected the picture, and the head of broadcast standards at the time happened to be someone I knew, so it was easy for me to get on the phone to New York and ask for help. The gentleman that was in charge of censorship at ABC agreed to come out and look at the picture with me. His staff had rejected the picture on so many levels that every note that they had meant recutting the picture. And I just simply said, we're not cutting a piece of it.
This is what you bought. You bought a Stephen King horror. We'll be able to show it in a very respectable, responsible way.
It is based on subject material that may be unsuitable for and unsettling to younger and impressionable viewers.
But we can't deny the audience what they come to expect.
I had made my argument that these were recollections of adults.
The blood. I cleaned the whole thing up that very same night.
And so therefore we could get away with children in jeopardy. The next day we were told no changes, move forward.
Well, the town of Derry in Maine is being terrorized every 30 years by something that these kids have come to call it. And it mostly takes the form of a clown called Pennywise, which they first encounter, or they first understand who he is when they find an old postcard. Then they see a photo of the 20s or the 30s, which comes to life in a sort of surface parade and comes right up to the surface of the postcard and tries to get out.
Welcome to downtown Derry, 1929.
Aaron, go.
The idea of the carnival scene is straight out of the book, the hand that reaches right out of the photo album and grabs at them.
Come on, it's just a drawing. The photo book was built by two people, Mike Steffi and Bob Comer. Both of them had this amazing mechanical ability to build what we call tabletop gags, really intricate things.
That was my favorite thing, that you see a photograph and I come alive. Such a great idea.
I have never seen so many cables attached to something that operated those pages to turn. It was a complex push-me, pull-me cable system. They had to hit their marks, so they had to have individual cables for individual pages. It took them weeks to build it. When they operated it, it was one of those, how do you hide all that stuff? Visual effects just didn't have the money.
All right, here we go. Yeah, take you and clear, please.
What I really wanted to emphasize was that I think I see Pennywise back there in the background somewhere, but he's just not bothering anybody.
And I picked up the book, and the first thing we saw was just a big hole in it. And he's like, all right, I want you guys to act like you guys are reading this book, like Pennywise is dancing down the street. He jumps on the pole.
Remember the pull-up.
Don't watch the clown background doing your own stuff.
Remember that a little lower and yeah.
And then here comes...
Oh, shit, he's right in your face, just like that.
And I need you guys to react.
It was Tommy's hand that kind of came up through there. I remember later seeing the completed scene and being blown away.
I thought that was a good, powerful moment.
Makeup effects were booming at that time. Garage shops were popping up everywhere, and Fantasy 2 was like an all-encompassing movie effects house.
We had a makeup effects wing, and Bart Nixon was the lead person in it.
Tommy Lee Wallace knew him from Fright Night 2.
I had set up their creature shop for Fright Night 2, so it was just natural for Gene to bring me back in. I had a crew of about a half a dozen artists on the show, but I probably selfishly, I wanted to do Pennywise myself.
That was Bart's baby. Bart sculpted it and did the whole application.
Fuzzy Bear does the twist.
Early on, I was doing a fair amount of clown research and sketching.
The idea, first of all, was to do a lot of research on representation of clowns over time, to have an historical perspective. We have to think of the size of the actor and how big we want him to be, how nimble we want him to be. What we're doing with the costume is we're serving his face. Everything has to serve the expression.
The first time I did prosthetics, I was doing Legend for Ridley Scott, where I played the devil.
He had mentioned that Rob Bottin had literally casted every inch of his body, so I think he wasn't anxious to have his life cast done again.
That's all right, I can bear it.
He was absolutely weighted down with special effects makeup to the point at which he was, to most people, was no longer recognizable as Tim Curry.
I was prosthetic down to my waist, and it was all glued on. And to get it off, they used to sit me in a bath, tear a hole in my head, and pour in solvent. And the two guys who were doing it were insane, probably because they were around solvents so much. You do get horribly claustrophobic, particularly if your whole face is covered.
So his only reservation was too much makeup. He wanted to be able to use his face. We pushed and pulled about how much makeup to do.
I'd met with him and we had a few conversations about what he did or didn't want to wear. He did want to go as light as possible with the prosthetics, so there was some evolution.
It's fun to evolve it. It's great fun when you're actually working it, making it part of yourself and finding out what it can do. And one of the nice things about a very broad, really feature-changing makeup is that you have no personal history with it. I mean, I don't think there's an actor or an actress in the world who actually likes his or her face. So to get rid of all of that stuff in front of a camera is totally useful.
I saw it as a fantasy character. It was an illusion that it's presenting to these children. I wanted it to almost be like a living cartoon, just as harmless and as pleasant looking as it could be, and that's why the colors are pure white and red and blue and very primary and very clean. I didn't want there to be cracks, and at least when he's presenting himself to the kids, he's casting this illusion, so why would he have flaws in it?
The usual accoutrement of clownmanship. It was definitely going to be white face. It was really the classic Bozo the Clown approach to begin with.
He came over to the shop, we took a life cast, and then we produced copies of the busts of his head. I believe I had 3 of those that I did play sketches on, where we did 3 different concepts. There was a hobo clown with jowls and droopy face. And then there was one in between that had more prosthetics on his face, but made him a little more angular and meaner. Once we produced the makeup, then we went up to Canada to test it, and we did 2 makeup tests.
When we got to Vancouver and we're doing our test makeup, I was so looking forward to that day and that moment when we would be able to sit with Tim with the makeup on and see this clown with bloodshot eyes and fangs and a scary face.
The first test was just the head and the nose with a paint scheme that was what Tim had wanted. He dictated the patterns on the face. The second test, we added the cheeks and the chin, and then I painted something closer to what I had on my original design, where he's got like a bigger red mouth and the blue eyes. They photographed both of those. The decision was made that he didn't really need the cheeks and chin, which at the time I was kind of like, hey, wait a minute. But I think he looks great like he is. The paint scheme evolved a little bit further. We did at least one more test where we just painted Tim's face white and then refined the patterns.
It's always kind of tough having that stuff
Y tus
stuck on you.
trailers.
There was a
Visita mi
certain
canal.
line that I was going past, and Bart Mixon was in on that conversation, as was Doug Higgins, the art director. We were all having discussions about Pennywise's look. I was excited about adding certain appliance makeup like a bulbous forehead, perhaps exaggerated cheekbones, big extended chin, things to cartoonize his face. Tim took a stand about that and said he really didn't want to wear these things. He agreed to try them on.
And he said, if you want me to wear this scary makeup, then I think you have the wrong actor. And I thought, what?
He had great patience and great
forbearance, because I think that job was a purgatory for him. I really do.
One more, Tim.
And God love him, he created a character that has scared the pants off of generations.
He said, look, just make me as a straight clown, and I will scare the audience. I thought, of course, that's why we have Tim Curry. He will scare us. We don't need all of that.
In the end, we removed all of them except the bulbous head, and I'm glad we stuck with that. But he was totally right that his face is so expressive.
Here's a profile, Tim.
That it was good to not see it too done up with rubber.
But Tim could act to a manhole cover if he wanted to, because he has that kind of charisma and presence.
I mean, the head is a prosthetic partly because a special effect needs to happen. And the nose, instead of actually just being a red ping-pong ball, it does appear to be part of one's face. But we started with a very simple face and then started playing around with it, really. Probably the first 5 days of shooting, I didn't think there was a day when the face was actually quite the same, because little tiny things evolved.
The look that we ended up with was based in a large part on the Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera. That's why it's got the upturned nose and the bulbous head.
The itsy-bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out.
I didn't film any of my scenes with Tim Curry because they didn't want to scare me. I was walking back to go to my trailer to go change, and Tim Curry's in full gear, his clown makeup, everything, and he walks by me and he goes, "Hi." And it scared me so much. To be honest, that's the reason why I still haven't seen the movie, because I'm terrified of clowns.
There was quite a good photograph in a magazine of me heading for the makeup trailer in a bathrobe with a Marlboro dangling from my face.
Tim kept himself quite aloof from us. He would basically just hang out in his cast chair, chain smoking, in full makeup, and whenever he saw us, he would just go,
Those kind of people always make your job easier.
The kids were actually quite scared of me.
I'd been playing it really cool, and then we wound up in a van going back to the hotel together, and I was wearing a Rocky Horror shirt, and I was like, trying to cover it up. And he saw it, and he was like, "Oh, you like the movie?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm into you, dude."
I have a picture of him in half a clown costume with me standing next to him looking slightly scared. That was taken off the set after shooting the shower scene, and I was too scared to ask him for that picture. My mom, however, was not.
I encouraged him to be really big because it's almost like a character who's satirizing himself constantly. He's being self-referential when he tells these awful, stupid jokes.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can?
And then, you know, it's like, wait, he's just demented. That's all there is to that. But wait, he's not even a clown. He's some other kind of monster. So, oh, I'm uneasy.
Pennywise is this really strange queer, not in LGBTQ sense, but like queer as in strange, as in aberrant. I think that the novel, more so than the miniseries, is very much grounded in the fact that Pennywise is on 3 different levels. It is in disguise as Pennywise. Pennywise then disguises himself as, say, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the mummy, the leper.
Get out of Derry while you still can.
Beverly's dad in a dress, so it's drag on drag on drag on drag. It's all about these very queer elements, which is what horror fiction's always about. It's always about the thing on the outside. So King is really preying on those fears of the outsider.
My first day of shooting on set was with Jonathan Brandis, where Stan goes to do some bird watching and ends up in a house.
Hello?
Stanley.
Yeah?
And of course, it manifests itself as that mummy.
Jim McLaughlin sculpted the mummy for me, which was basically a makeup that Jim had done a year or so earlier, and I was like, that looks cool. You mind if we use that in the movie? So he just, made me a copy of that.
There's a werewolf, which was really cool, that was done by Norman Corporera.
This isn't happening.
He's like, we're doing an homage to I Was a Teenage Werewolf, the Michael Landon creature, and I was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer, man. I want to do this.
When I saw the stunt guy in the suit the first time, all I wanted to do was touch it.
Werewolves was always my favorite monster in every movie. And I loved I was a teenage werewolf because he had these really cool streaks, and he wore like a school jacket, and he was like a greaser. I basically got my old monster magazines out. So I had the reference was all there. I knew exactly what they were going for. And I like giving it a slightly updated twist.
I look at Night 2, and I think it suffers in part from the problems of being only a Night 2.